So Nick, here we are today on a beautiful March day.
Well, it's a privilege to be with Capricorn Radio, James.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean the idea.
Capricorn TV. Capricorn
Well,
TV.
we do both here. Capricorn Radio, Capricorn TV. Pleasure to talk to you today. I've come across you through various channels from Robert Boval has recommended me, largely because of the article you wrote about the cartouche. But we're going to get to that because you wrote several articles for Graham Hancock's forum. Very interesting.
Well, as a science historian, I feel the basic thesis of Graham Hancock is so important and valuable for the human race, that there was a great civilization which somehow could measure the Earth. It was a maritime civilization, and then amnesia somehow prevailed. That's the mystery. We lost the memory of it.
Wow.
And I feel that's such a wonderful, important thesis he developed.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things for me with the megalithic civilization is that we have it lost. There is a way we can peer back into the past with newfound scientific academic disciplines and historians as well. There's archaeoacoustics, archaeoastronomy. You know, we're starting to get an idea that these guys had a highly advanced measurement system, maybe primitive technology in what we call technology today, but it was certainly a high technology that they had to move stones and measure circumference of the earth. So perhaps starting with that, let's talk about earth measurements, geodetic measurements, and the history of that, Nick.
Well, the geodetic measurements comes out most clearly in the Greek units of measure, the foot and the stade, and that is integrally related to the Roman foot. And there's a 24 to 25 link between them. These are the feet of the ancient world, so-called Olympian Greek feet, and the stadium was 600 of these feet. The stadium in Athens, and the Acropolis was measured in these Greek feet very precisely. That's the 5th century BC, or was it the 6th? Whoever constructed the Acropolis was using measures absolutely linked in to the size of the Earth, and it's only in the last, say, a couple of centuries that we've got an exact measure for the size of the Earth, its mean radius, mean circumference, enables us to calibrate how exact those Greek foot measurements were. And it's based on there's an ancient Sumerian mathematics that involved the fourth power of 60, which is a very, very extraordinary, and not what science historians expected at all, but they found it in the most ancient Sumerian maths, about 2200 BC, and that gives you the scaling factor. You take 360 degrees of the circle, divide it by 60 to get arc minutes, divide it by 60 to get arc seconds. That then gives you, I think, is it 10 of those arc seconds?
Sure.
10 Greek feet to 1 arc second. But it exactly plugs in that fourth power of 60 to measure the Greek foot.
Of course, there was a tablet found at which had this magic number, the fourth power of 60,
yeah.
Or 3,600 squared is another way of saying that. But this special number, 12,960,000, is the long, or 60 to the power of 4, in other words.
Yeah.
Nobody could understand why this number was on the tablet, but when you look at it in terms of this 66 hexadecimal system and the circumference of the Earth, it seems to make sense, Nick.
It does make some sense, doesn't it? Now, as a science historian, I looked at the old books on the history of maths, you know, that's a Neugebauer, Van der Waerden, the great classics, and I wondered, well, how come none of them mention this?
Yeah.
Why don't they mention this? I looked at any history of maths, they don't mention it. And it's just too far out. They want early maths to be, you know, counting how many cows you've got, or trying to count the number of days in a lunar month. And it's just too anomalous for them to have mathematics based on the fourth power of 60, which we find in those ancient tablets. You know, you divide it by 3, divide it by 6. You look at the factors of that big primal number. So you've got the axiom, this illusory axiom, which the whole of history of science is based on, that you have to have a very primitive beginning. You have to have a simple primitive beginning. And what we find, as you pointed out, it actually isn't the case.
It's not a primitive beginning. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that, because the more we look into the past, the more complicated it seems to be at the very, very start. And I think you've shown that with your articles, through complex analysis, albeit, that there is mathematics encoded in the pyramids. There's mathematics encoded in measurements of units of measurement, whether they are geodetic or the stay that the Greeks had. I guess probably just before we go on to that, Nick, you are a PhD science of historian. Can you tell us what that really entails? Because you have to really take in several different disciplines for that, Nick.
Well, I'm always fascinated by the moon, lunar theory and stuff, and that's what my PhD was on. And I've done some, a couple dozen papers, history, astronomy, and I think it's a wonderful discipline. And there isn't a lot of public interest in it, but it does have this problem that in ancient times it won't look at these. I think the mysterious origin of things in a proper way.
I think one of the shortcomings is that it's left to a very small group of individuals, usually not within the field, to look into. I mean, archaeologists don't want to touch it. Egyptologists don't want to touch it. I mean, it's usually a science of historian like yourself or somebody.
Well, that's where I feel Graham Hancock did so much. His books opened up the subject for millions of people all around the world, what had previously been very much a fringe subject, sort of paranormal, weird, or just strangely anomalous. He helped us to see that this is actually the normal pattern of ancient prehistory. Somewhere around the 2nd, 3rd millennium BC, you get this disjunction amnesia, and you get these very ancient buildings in which apparently the builders could make and lift and shape huge stones. That's why we call it megalithic, just word meaning big stone. Apparently, say in Egypt, 400-ton blocks could be lifted and shaped, and a characteristic of this early stage is that you don't have any writing. There's no hieroglyphs on them. It's just, you just get the bare rocks left there, and I think one kind of clue we may sometimes get, I feel, is the units of measure that they may. One thing I really wish Graham Hancock would do, if he'd kept on with his work, which he somewhat hasn't, would be to have a symposium looking at different units of measure. Wow. I think it's been shown that European units of measure are interlinked and derived from primal units linked to the scale of the Earth. And let me point out, the most sort of quite a credulity-straining bit of this is Stonehenge. The wheel, the Great Sarsen ring at Stonehenge, made of 29.5 sarsens and circular lintels put on it. That was holding a circular measure.
Wow.
We have, from the 19th century, various people believing they could measure the radius quite exactly of that. And as British philosopher John Michel pointed out, that is 100 Roman feet. And I think 96 Greek feet. So 24-25 relation between those two. So the so-called Roman foot, as it was used in the ancient Mediterranean, in building construction and so forth, our earliest measure of it is in Stonehenge. Now that is implies something totally incredible for normal sort of what might call rational logic. A unit of measure could remain intact over those eons of time,
or rediscovered,
possibly rediscovered. Yeah, but somehow it's got to endure, and
if there was
be Europe-wide.
If there was a geodetic reason for, like, you use the circumference of the Earth as the backbone of the unit of measurement, that would explain why it might be rediscovered then.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you put your finger on it there. I think that's how it can be discovered. And what is fascinating is that I think whoever built the Acropolis was somehow using that measure plugged into the scale of the Earth, whereas when the Greek philosophers came along, a couple of centuries later, they'd forgotten it. Plato did not know. Imagine Plato leaning against the newly built Acropolis, and he was wondering about, obviously fascinated by number. He knew that there was a base 60. He knew that there were stades with 60 or 600 Greek feet, but he did not realise that these Greek measurements were encoding or derived from the size of the Earth.
Wow.
And Greek maths was not base 60, as we know very well. The Babylonian Sumerian maths was, And the Greeks had units of measure using base 60,
Mm-hmm.
multiples of 60.
Sure.
But as it were, they didn't know why they had that.
Sure. So you're talking about the stade. There was different types of stades. There was the Greek stade and the Roman stade. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Slightly different.
Yeah, various different, and the Egyptian stayed as well, which involved different sub-multiples. As if you took 1 minute of arc of the Earth's mean circumference and divide it in various ways, gave you the different states.
Stades. So the stade really was a way of chopping up the circumference of the Earth into your your individual. They were personalising their own stade. Each person had their own type of stade.
Well, each country. Yeah. And Ptolemy